This is Dr. Perry, and this is the fourth session of the Child Trauma Academy's 7-slide series. As you start to get signals from the world that it's a little bit more complex, that things are there's a little novelty out there, there's something I need to focus on in the external world, you get to an active alert state. And you start to use lower parts of the brain to control your functioning. And you move away from these higher, more complex, abstract thinking parts of the brain to parts of the brain that are more concrete. And as you start to get signals that say, hey, I'm under threat, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm cold, I've got some unknown signals that are coming from the outside world, and some of them might be even threatening, your brain shifts and starts to use lower parts of the brain in a predominant way. And essentially, in a state dependent way, the locus of control is moving from higher parts of the brain to lower parts of the brain as you become increasingly threatened. And as I've sort of gone through here, you go from the neocortex all the way down to your brainstem when you feel particularly fearful or terrorized. And so what happens is your brainstem actually is a part of the brain that will manage information and process information and, quote, solve problems in a way that's very different than the top part of your brain. So when you're calm, like I said, you can be abstract and reflective, and you can be future oriented, and you can really solve problems in an innovative, quote, humane way. And as you start to feel a little bit of complexity in the external world and things get a little bit more, if you will, stressful, you will be likely to use your cortex, but you tend to use parts of your cortex that are a little bit more automatic, a little bit more routine. Things you solve current problems with old problem-solving paradigms. And again, in a state of alarm, as you get more threatened, your style of cognition shifts to be much more emotional and ultimately reactive. And then finally, when you're in a state of fear, you really aren't thinking. You're essentially reacting. And your behavior and your, quote, problem solving in that moment is very reflexive. This, of course, is good if you have a situation where you don't have the time to process and come up with a solution, and you just need to act. You need to jump out of the way of the train. You need to immediately remove your hand from the hot object. That's appropriate. But it's really not going to result in a very complex solution to a problem if you are in a state of high alarm or fear and you are trying to solve complex problems. You will get categorical, in many ways, very black and white type solutions. You will not see things in a complex, nuanced way. And so, in a real way, it's if you looked at, if you would, the IQ that you could reflect when you're calm, it's going to be relatively high. And if, let's say you have an IQ of somewhere between 120 and 100, you're a little bit above average. And all of a sudden you start to go out into the real world and everyday activities, you actually are going to solve problems in a way that's a little bit less intelligent than you would if you had lots of time to reflect on the issue. And the more threatened you get, literally, the dumber you get. And so people who are under threat, people who feel threatened, people who are in situations where there's chronic unpredictability, where there's stress and threat, will have problem-solving approaches that are much, much less intelligent than they could solve if they themselves had a more predictable situation, if they had more economic resources, if they had more housing stability, if they had more healthy relational supports. They would have problem solving that would reflect a higher IQ. And again, this is a crucial aspect of state-dependent functioning. All functioning, the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you behave, is going to be influenced by your state. Now, this is something that we see all the time in working with children and adults who've been impacted by trauma. Their functioning and their behavior and their decision making tends to be less competent, less capable, less mature than would be possible if the very same people were put in situations where they were safe. And again, we'll come back and talk about this in greater detail on many future of our clinically oriented case-based presentations for the 7-slide series. To summarize all of this, this table shows what can happen as you move from a state of calm down the arousal continuum into a state of fear. Your style of cognition shifts, the part of the brain involved in controlling the majority of your function shifts, your functional IQ shifts, and in future sessions I'll talk about the implications of this for creating contingency-based programs, creating educational environments, thinking about therapeutic interactions and so forth.